Hey guys, Todd here with another Magic Online video. Today we're going to be running the Colorless Eldrazi deck from the last Pro Tour through the Gauntlet. And if you didn't watch the Pro Tour last weekend, you missed something that was pretty epic, but also kind of sad. It's not too often that a brand new archetype really just breaks an eternal like format, such as Modern. And this deck really, only made up a small percentage of the day one metagame. I think 7% was the amount. Two different or three different teams on just this, Ivugan plus Eldrazi Temple, core that focused on things like Thought Knot Seer and Reality Smasher to abuse the extra mana. And if you haven't played with or against Thought Knot Seer yet, the card is phenomenal. It's just so good. I can't really describe just like why it's insanely good. I mean, obviously, it has the ability to strip your opponent's best card, and then if it dies, they just get a random card. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds out of something like a Tideholder Scholar. But it can also come down on turn 2 and like a Tideholder Scholar, but it's quite big. It doesn't die to Lightning Bolt, therefore it's a little bit better. Reality Smasher is the other big guy in the deck. This colorless requirement is a downside of sorts, but at the same time, you get to play with all these great colorless lands that have all these added benefits, and we actually have no colored spells in the deck that aren't also just Phyrexian mana spells. I got a cat. This cat always be jumping up when I'm trying to record. She likes being on camera. Anyway, this deck was on camera a lot. Some of the bigger teams were playing it. There were a lot of really great players playing it. Luis Scott Vargas, you had Shuhei Nakamura, Mike Segrist, and a host of others that were all playing this exact 75, if not super close. Like maybe a few deviated by a card or two, but for the most part, as far as I could tell, this was the same 75 played by everybody. There are going to be a ton of written articles this week about the deck, so I felt like playing into matches with it against, hopefully a diverse set of opponents would be much better than just being the fifth guy who wrote about the deck when I didn't even play it at the Pro Tour. I wasn't even qualified for the Pro Tour. I did play it at regionals, though, after getting a feel, a handle on all the cards in the deck. It was on camera so much on day one that it was really not that difficult to piece together. We also saw the blue-red version of the deck win the actual tournament in the hands of JC Tao, and his version also looked really good, but I built this one first, and I played a lot with it before he actually won on Sunday, so I wanted to keep playing the deck that I'm a little more comfortable with, and maybe over the next week or so I may transition to the blue-red one if I think it's a little bit better. So let's go ahead and just get through the meat of the deck. I only made one change. I kind of want to make a few more, but I didn't want to change it too much. At least from what I could tell, Mutavault for me had been better than Blinkmoth Nexus in the few matches that I played, mostly just because your opponent's going to focus a lot of their removal on the creatures that you play, so you want your man lands to be able to hit, your creature lands to hit a little hard, as opposed to the Blinkmoth Nexus, which can only hit for one. Flying is pretty big, and the chip damage you can get in with the Blinkmoth Nexus is actually pretty sweet, but I felt like Mutavault was going to be able to pressure the opponent or even opposing planeswalkers a little bit better than Blinkmoth Nexus. You also don't have the splash damage of dying to something like Ancient Grudge, so I did like that. But one cool thing to note is that Blinkmoth Nexus does have the secondary ability to pump target Blinkmoth creature, and Mutavault just so happens to be all creature types, including Blinkmoth, so you got the little trick in there where you can make it a 3/3 attacker for a turn if you're lucky. The rest of the mana base, we have the 4 Ivugan, and even though it's a legendary land, the effect is just too powerful. You get to make every creature in your deck except for Spellskite cost 2 less mana. You can have some really busted starts with Eldrazi Mimic. If you have multiples, you just get to play them all that turn, which is pretty awesome. And Ivugan also works pretty well with the card Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth. Now, if you notice, Urborg makes them into swamps, so if you have an Ivugan and an Urborg on turn 2, you can't actually cast Thought Knot Seer. It just there's a colorless reduction cost, and then 2 black mana, so you can't actually do that. But you can cast a 4/4 Endless one on turn 2, which is pretty sweet. And if you have any colorless land, Urborg, and Ivugan, that actually lets you cast Reality Smasher on turn 3, which is pretty good. So the one thing that and most people missed when they were building this deck, when it was the cookie cutter version of the deck, right when the set was spoiled, was no one really was playing Simian Spirit Guide, and it didn't take long for people to be able to put two and two together with Simian Spirit Guide and Chalice of the Void, and being able to play that on turn 1 for X=1 does shut down a lot of strategies. It puts a hurting on stuff like Burn. It makes decks that play stuff like Serum Visions just not function the way that they're supposed to function. And even if you cast it on turn 2 for X=1, it's not that big of a deal. But if you're on the play and you go Spirit Guide and then Chalice, it actually just wins the game against a majority of opponents that are traditional modern decks, if that makes sense. The rest of the deck, the other Eldrazi land is Eldrazi Temple. This, along with Ivugan, lets you cast giant guys on turn 2 a bunch. And then, the 3 Blink Moth, the 4 Mutavaults, and then 4 Ghost Quarter, which I think at this point is just going to be the standard for this colorless deck. I actually, at Regionals, tried to branch out a little bit and play some Cavern of Souls to help fend off decks that play stuff like Remand, but after playing 3 matches with the deck, I just regretted it. Just their deck list is almost perfect, and it may be even right. The 4 Blink Moth is better than 4 Mutavault, but their deck list did look great. And one thing I do want to point out, though, is that since the blue-red version did win, and it did beat this deck 3 times in the top 8 in the hands of JC Tao, I think that the blue-red one is just better. It may not be better against an open field because Chalice of the Void is so good, but if everyone is playing this Eldrazi deck, or if everyone is playing, variations on this style of deck, the blue-red one might just be the best thing you can do. It does seem very good, but like I said, this is the version I'm playing with, so we're going to get a run through a league here in just a moment and see how we do. The rest of the deck, we got a bunch of Eldrazi that are made cheaper by the 2 mana lands, 2 Spell Guide, 2 Ratchet Bomb, just colorless ways to help interact with your opponent early. Ratchet Bomb, pretty sweet at cleaning up stuff like Lingering Souls tokens. It can help you tick up to like 1 or 2 and just blow up all the creatures out of like Zoo. It has its uses. It's actually your only way to beat something like Ensnaring Bridge, which is pretty hilarious. I mean, you could play Oblivion Stone or something like that. There aren't a lot of colorless ways to deal with artifacts and enchantments. And then we have 4 Dismembers, which I think, even though like Burn is a highly played deck in Modern, Dismember is actually just too good against everything else. And since our deck deals us virtually no damage from our mana base, unlike most decks in the format, the Dismembers don't actually hurt that much. I've played a good bit with the deck already, and there are a lot of times on like turn 4 or 5 where I cast a Dismember and go down to 16, and normally I'd be going down to like 9 because I've taken, 5 to 7 damage off of my lands and my Jataxian Probes and stuff like that. So it is refreshing to play a deck that doesn't deal itself any damage other than with Fire Extinct Mana spells. Sideboard, 4 Relic of Progenitus and 3 Oblivion Sower is kind of this little mini package that the deck can morph into a bit slower of a deck. Oblivion Sower, I think, is just too good in the mirror to not play. Being able to hit your opponent's Ghost Quarters will let you start just actually strip mining them out of the game, along with, once you get through their 2 wastes. I do want to try a version of this deck that plays Crucible of Worlds out of the sideboard. Once you get to a point in the game where it's kind of a board stall, just being able to bring back the lands that they've Ghost Quartered, bring back your own Ghost Quarters, just seems like a fairly powerful effect. The 3 Gutshots here in the sideboard, I kind of want to try to get a 4th in there, but excuse me. The Warping Well does a decent impression of a Gutshot most of the time. Unfortunately, this is not a tribal Eldrazi spell, so we can't cast it off of Eldrazi Temple for the 2 mana, unfortunately. Other than that, we got 2 Pithing Needle to help out against random stuff like Liliana the Veil, Gristlebrand, and any sort of permanent that could give you problems like Karn or whatnot. A 3rd Ratchet Bomb and a 3rd Spellskite in matchups where either are good, and that's about it. All right, guys. Well, let's go ahead and jump into some matches and see how we do. We'll be right back.